Good afternoon. Good to be with you guys. I heard a rousing shout go up from the crowd when they said Huntington Beach. Anybody here from Huntington Beach? Huntington Beach? Yes. Yes. I never thought I'd be in Huntington Beach. I was raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, and stuff fell apart there in my family, and my mom moved my brother and my three sisters and I out to California, to Long Beach. And Long Beach? We were in Long Beach from 67 until about 72. I got saved in 1970, in November 9th, 1970. At 18 years old, I'm almost 63 right now. I'm probably the oldest speaker for On the Edge, right? Yes, so far, yes. There was a disappointed voice there that said, yes, I'm sorry. But I still feel in my heart like I'm about 16. And yeah. And I don't know what it is that will, and it'll probably happen for you guys too. That there'll be someday you'll find yourself 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, but and if you ignore the guy that you look at in the mirror every day, because the guy I see in the mirror tries to convince me that I'm not 16 years old, but you'll adopt some mental age in your head. And I want to get a little bit younger. I'd rather have a junior high mentality, actually, because those guys push past barriers and they ignore warnings at times, sometimes good warnings, but there's an adventurous spirit in junior high school, and I want to back up a little bit and have a little bit of a junior high mentality. But I want to give you just a tiny bit of my own, I guess, bio or story. And my brother and I and our whole family, we were raised in a Roman Catholic family. And I did believe in God. I didn't know him, but I believed in him. And I was doing what, anybody else here raised in religion before you really met Jesus? And for how many of you, it was at least a little bit of, okay, I know what I got to do to appear acceptable. I know the hoops I have to jump through. I got to go to church. I got to, and whatever they are. And I knew what those hoops were. My brother and I were altar boys. And which I look back at it and it was just laughable. I remember the day that my father recruited the other young man in our church to teach us Latin, because at that point the Mass was still all said in Latin. And his name was Mike Safranco. I don't know why that name sticks in my head, but he was maybe 2 or 3 years older than us, and he was a veteran altar boy. So we had to learn what to say at particular times. And I'll never forget sitting down with Mike, and he said, okay, this is what you say. And I can't remember any of it except the amens and the dominis. But he said, I said, well, Mike, what does all that mean? What's all the Latin mean? He said, it's not important what it means, just say it. And I remember the feeling at that moment, like, this doesn't seem right to me. That all I'm doing is, I didn't know that I was kind of speaking in tongues without knowing what it was, but it was Latin, and it was all laid out, it had been laid out for hundreds of years. And I just remember just a question mark in my head. And so we walked through that for several years. Then Mom and Dad split up, and I think they'd been married by that time about 13 years maybe. And Mom decided she couldn't live with Dad anymore, and they were both great people, but the marriage was over. And after a few years, my grandmother passed away. Really, she was my great aunt, who raised my mom when her mama died when she was a little girl. She was the most godly woman I've ever met in my life, Anna Van Frank. But when Aunt Anna died, Mom decided it's safe now to pick up all the kids and move them out to California. So we moved out to California, against my father's resistance. But he had they basically had to ask all the kids, "Do you want to move to California? Do you want to move to California?" Has it been muggy out here, by the way? Has been, yeah, that's Ohio through the summer every single day down by the Ohio River. So the court officer says, "Billy, do you want to move to California?" I'm thinking, California? Ohio, muggy Ohio, or on the beaches in California? Of course I want to move to California. So all the kids said California, and we packed up in a 1963, I think it was a 1963 Chevy Nova station wagon with my mom, her boyfriend, and 5 kids and 2 German Shepherd dogs who did not travel well. And if you count the number of seats in any kind of car like that, there was a front seat, bench seat, 3 people, and then there was the next seat, 3 people, and somebody had to sit in the back. When I was 15 years old, I was 4'11". Guess who got stuck in the back? It was me, with dogs that threw up on the way, and it was miserable, but we made it to California. We checked into our apartment that my uncle had set up for us. My mom's brother lived out here, and it was right down on Ocean Boulevard in Long Beach. And it was, less than 100 steps to the beach, and we thought we were in paradise. But it wasn't paradise. My mother's boyfriend was my former Boy Scout leader. And he was, I think, a Baptist deacon. I know he was Baptist. I don't know if he was a deacon, but the only time I had ever been in any church but a Catholic church was when we went to watch one of Lou's, that was his name, Lou's boys get baptized. And I remember this, absolutely honest before God. That next Thursday, I went to confession in the Catholic Church, and I confessed to the priest, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I went into a Baptist church this week. And I had to confess that because we were told it was wrong. It was a sin to go to any other church. When I would walk down the street in Batavia, Ohio, just outside Cincinnati, if I saw a Protestant church on one side of the street, I crossed the street because I didn't want to go past it because I knew the preacher would come out and grab me and drag me into sin in the Baptist religion. And so we just had nothing to do with it. So here was this going on in my mind. My mama's boyfriend, who's my scout leader. Were any of you guys Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts? Do you remember the motto? Or maybe the motto was be prepared, but do you remember the pledge? It was something like, a scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And anybody remember that? Did I do good? I think I got them all. Now those were, if you look at those like little candles that you're supposed to keep lit at all times, always trustworthy, always loyal, always courteous. There were several of those candles, I just couldn't keep them lit. I couldn't keep the reverent one lit. And there's several of the other ones, but also my Boy Scout leader couldn't either. Because here he's running around with my mom. And so he moves us out to California, and he used to take us on family vacations. I don't know what he told his other family, but he'd take us on family vacations from Ohio down to Georgia. And we had greater vacations than we ever had with our dad. And wonder what's going on back home. Well, he was moving us out to California, told my mom, I'm going to go back to Ohio, divorce my wife, I'm going to come out and marry you, and he was going to be our dad. And I thought, well, I guess that's the way it goes. He moved us out. We took him to the airport that night. He flew back to Ohio and sent my mom a letter that it was over, that he was getting back with his wife, which was the right thing to do, no question. But then our life just began to just spiral as a family. Mom felt more guilt than I'd ever, and she felt a lot of guilt from the divorce of my dad. And she wore that for the rest of her life, really. I remember my brother Kevin and I, he's 1 year older than me, and we were sitting in the kitchen one night. We'd moved out of the big, beautiful old house we used to live in into a house that was just like a concrete block. That's what it felt like, just one great big concrete block. It was really small. What should have been the back bedroom was actually a cistern. It was just filled up with water that turned into ice in the winter. It was kind of miserable, and Mom was miserable. And I remember my brother and I sitting in the kitchen with her this one night, and pardon me, as you get into your 60s, and maybe you get a little more emotional when you tell these stories, but my brother had wrestled the gun away from my mother, and he'd wrestled the bullets away from her. And we're sitting in the kitchen pleading with her not to take her life, that there was a reason to live. It was just misery. So, we moved from there out to California, and Lou was going to come and be our dad, and then it was over, and Mom just crashed. It was crazy. And she found another boyfriend. We moved from Ocean Boulevard. If anybody knows Long Beach, we moved up to Anaheim and Walnut, which was right in the middle of what they call the red light district. And there were prostitutes walking on the street, and we were tucked into this one-bedroom apartment. Do a little bit of math on this one. It was a one-bedroom apartment with my mom and her new boyfriend and 5 kids and 2 German Shepherd dogs, which we had to get rid of pretty quickly. It was miserable. Anybody ever heard of a Murphy bed? No. You know what a Murphy bed is? Well, my brother and I, who had always had to share a bed, as little boys growing up, and it always sagged in the middle, so we always rolled down into a pile in the middle of it and fought over who was on whose side of the bed, like everybody does in that situation. But My brother and I we slept on this Murphy bed that it came swinging out of the closet and dropped down in the living room. One of my sisters was sleeping on the couch, and a couple of them, I don't know where they were, but they were all over this little one-bedroom apartment. And my brother decided he hated California. And there was one particular reason back in Ohio why he hated California. I'm going to take a guess at what that might have been. No, it had nothing to do with the Bengals. It was a girl. It was a girlfriend. And he got permission from Mom, and he got permission from Dad back in Ohio. I want to move back to Ohio. I want to move into the school district that Linda lives in, and so I can be there with all of my friends. I'm over California. And he got permission from both of them. And he came and he woke me up this morning. It had to be like 5 o'clock in the morning. Anybody here just not a morning person? Yeah, look at all those hands. I see those hands. Yes, I see those hands. And Kevin came and he woke me up early that morning, and he said, "Hey, Billy, go to the bus station with me." He was taking the Greyhound back to Ohio. He said, "Go to the bus station with me." And I looked up at him and I said, "No, man, I'll see you later." And I think I was partly bummed out that he was leaving, maybe even a little bit upset with him that he was leaving the pack of Welsh kids and heading back to Ohio. But I said, "No, man, I'll see you later." And that was the last time I ever saw him. He went back to Ohio, got there in the spring of 1968. I have his journal that he kept during that epic journey for him out on his own. And he got back there and they got a couple of jobs to just have spending money and put gas in a car that he had bought, just an old car. And in August of 1968, he got sick with spinal meningitis. And a month later, he died. And I remember when we got the news. We lived in this little apartment. By this time, we'd moved 3 more times. We were up in Paramount, California, at the corner of Orange and Alondra, just across from Compton, Watts and all that. And it just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper. But my uncle came, knocked on our door, and said, "You need to come down." We didn't have a phone. "You need to come down to my apartment, and Kevin's sick." And I remember going back to the apartment that afternoon and sitting in the kitchen, trying to process all this with my mom. And I'm sitting on a kitchen chair in this little apartment in Paramount. And I just remember beating my head backward against the wall, saying, "This is not right. This is not right." And saying, "God, take me, not him. Take me, not him." And God didn't answer my prayer or my demand. And a month later, he died on September 28, 1968. And I was the only one in my family of children or my mom that went back to the funeral. My mom never could have faced my dad. In fact, they never spoke again for the rest of their life that I know of. And I went back to this little town, my father's hometown, where my brother was to be buried, about 100 miles from where Kevin and I had been altar boys. And strangely enough, the priest that we had last served under in Batavia, Ohio, was now the priest over the church in Urbana, Ohio, 100 miles away. And it was just surprising to me. And I remember walking into his office, and I said to him, "I just don't get this. I don't understand. You've been through that. By the age that you are, you've been through that a ton of times. I don't get it." And here's what I said: if God is so good, and God is so powerful, why do wicked people get to live? And why do good people die? I will never forget his answer to me that day. He said, "Your brother died because your parents got divorced." I remember looking across the desk at him, behind his great big desk, and just feeling like, that's supposed to help me? That's supposed to help me process this? And I didn't have the courage to say it to him, but in my heart, I said, "You can keep your Jesus. You can keep your religion. You can keep your Bible. You can keep your church. Keep your candles and your incense. I'm gone." And I came back to California. I remember sitting before I came back, I went to the funeral, and I remember sitting in the back of my dad's Corvair. Anybody remember Corvairs? Sitting in the back of my dad's old Corvair, looking out the window, the side window at my brother's grave. And I had done a lot of weeping, a lot of crying. He was my hero. He was my best friend. And because we were brothers, And I was 4'11" as a sophomore. He was a foot taller as a junior. He was my protector too. I'd get in trouble with my little big mouth, and Kevin would come and rescue me, usually. One time he let me get beat up for my bad mouth, and I probably deserved it. But I remember looking out that window, and I decided I'm not crying anymore. It's the last tear. And for years and years, I had no emotion when it came to, things like that. I came back to California and just dove into the whole hippie scene that was going on at that time. The drugs, the sex, the rock and roll, all of it. And just tried to fit in there, and it was as empty as anything else was before that. And for 2 years and 2 months, that's who I was trying desperately to be. Angry with God if he was really there. Still believed somehow that God had something to do with making this enormous, beautiful, intricate world. But I was very, very angry with him. And in a sense, I shook my face toward the heavens, and my fist toward the heavens, I should say, and was over any kind of a desire to really know and please God. I remember one night we were hitchhiking back with some friends. We'd hitchhiked up into Yosemite and Sequoia and then across to Highway 1, and we were coming down from Big Sur. And we got stuck in a little, anybody ever drive Highway 1 right on the coast? You ever heard of Gorda, California? You blink and you miss it, really, literally. There's only 3 things there. There's a gas station, a restaurant, and I think a motel with about 10 beds in it. But we got dropped off there, of all places, and I remember right before we got dropped off, we'd gotten picked up by these guys who had some acid, some LSD. And so we bought some from them, and I took one, and after about an hour, nothing. It just didn't hit. And so when we got dropped off there, we'd been on the side of the road for I don't know how long, hitchhiking, and just nobody would pick us up. And I said to my friend, Paul, give me another one. And so I took another one, and as soon as I took that one, the first one hit. And it was like the most frightening night of my life. I thought I was losing my mind. And I'm looking out at this ocean. I see these, the boats sort of bobbing up and down on the ocean. I don't know if they were really there or I was just seeing them by this point. But I remember looking up at the sky, feeling like I'm about to lose my mind. I've heard stories about people like this that jump off cliffs and out of buildings. And there we were on a cliff way up above the Pacific Ocean. And I wanted to call out to God, but I didn't want to even say God. I certainly didn't want to say Jesus. This is going to sound crazy, but I looked up into the sky. The stars were beautiful and they were vibrant, and I saw this one constellation. I still to this day don't know what it's called, but it looks like it has a head, an oval head, and then the outline of the stars look like a guy that's just running like this. Like he's in full stride running, and I said, okay, I'm going to call you Charlie. Whoever you are up there, I'm calling you Charlie. And I cried out to Charlie. I said, Charlie, please help me. But you know what I think happened that night? I really believe that when I dialed up Charlie, God said, I think he wants me. I'll take this call. He doesn't want to talk to me, but I'll take this call. And he set some things in motion that night when I didn't even want to know him. I didn't want to have his name on my lips or the name of his son on my lips. And he began to bring people into my life. And one after another. And I look back, and it's probably close to a year that I had people who invited me to church, wanted to tell me about Jesus. We were down in Hollywood. We'd hitchhike up there sometimes or drive one of my friend's car, and we'd just walk up and down either Sunset Boulevard or Hollywood Boulevard or Sunset Strip and just try to score drugs. And there was a no loitering law in Hollywood at that point, so because there was so much drug trafficking going on. That you weren't allowed to loiter. You weren't allowed to stand on the street corners, which was great for the Campus Crusade people and the Christians that were up there witnessing to everybody, because when you tried to walk away from them, well, they couldn't stand there either, so they just walk along with you and keep preaching Jesus to you. And over probably the full year before I got saved, there was maybe 12 or 13, maybe 14 people who somehow told me about Jesus. But one afternoon, before that night, one afternoon, I was back at Lakewood High School. I had graduated from that high school a little less than a year before. I guess about 6 or 7 months before. So, because this was in November, and I'm walking along with my girlfriend, who still went there, and in front of her is a couple of her friends, and one of them was named Cheryl, and she's carrying a great big stack of books, and on top of the books was a big, thick, big fat book that looked like a novel. And it said, Good News for Modern Man. And I grabbed it off the top of her stack of books and I said, what is this thing? And she said, oh, it's a Bible. And I kind of pitched it back to her and said, you can keep that. I'm not interested in that. And she sat down on the quad at Lakewood High School and told me about Jesus. She started to work my heart. And she put up with all of my arguments. How many of you argued with somebody before you said yes to Jesus? How many of you said something like, I don't need your Jesus. I'm happy for you. I'm happy that that works for you. And I gave her everything that I knew to just end the argument, end the conversation, and let her get on to her class that she had ditched to tell me about Jesus that afternoon. And so we're sitting there, and she starts to get on the drugs. She said, Bill, you're killing yourself with the drugs. And I was. Life was just absolutely painful. Some of you know what that's like. I mean, every step that I took, literally, I'm not exaggerating at all, every step that I took, it felt like my teeth were going to fall out of my head. There was just pain all over my body from all the stuff that I was doing to it. And she said, you're killing yourself with your drugs. And I had a great argument for her. See, a different girlfriend that I had, she told me, she said, you got to go with me. I got to go visit a friend who just got out of prison on a drug charge. So we went into his garage, and he's standing there in the garage, I guess, of his parents' house, and he's got a Bible in one hand and a joint in the other hand. And I said, you can't do that, can you? I think Christians were allowed to do drugs. And he said to me, hey, listen, brother. And he opened up the little tiny Bible in his hand, and he turned to Genesis chapter 1. And he said, it says right here in Genesis chapter 1, he has given us every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth. And I said, that's in the Bible? Honestly, that's the only Bible verse I knew. We as Catholics, we didn't memorize Bible verses, we memorized catechism answers. I had no idea I said, I love that verse. And so when Cheryl started getting on me about the drugs, I said, hey, doesn't the Bible say God made everything on the planet? She said, yeah. And doesn't it say he made herbs? And doesn't it say he made all this stuff? And if he made it, we can smoke it, we can make it into whatever we want, and we can use it. And her answer to me, it was the 2x4 upside my head that stopped me in my tracks. I've never heard anybody else use this. But she said, well, Bill, look. And she had been a heroin addict. She'd been set free like that, and she blamed Jesus on it, or for it. He said, he set me free. I couldn't argue with her on her own story. But she said to me, listen, Bill, yeah, he made all that stuff. But he also made high cliffs, but not for you to jump off of. Woo! Woo! Yeah. And it stopped me. It stopped me in my tracks. And I said, okay, I'll go with you to your little Jesus meeting. That's what it was called. Body and soul, a Jesus meeting. And when I walked in that night, it was a room about half the size of this, a long, kind of a narrow room. And there were kids sitting on the floor, rolled out carpet. All the chairs had been taken out. It was an old Baptist church. If I'd seen Baptist on the sign when we pulled in, I think I would have had defenses up. But when I walked in, they were singing. And they were singing to Jesus as if they knew him and as if they loved him. And when they stood up to sing, their arms went around each other without anybody telling them to do that. And I sensed something of the love that was in that place before the preacher, Rick Hicks, ever got up to speak one single word. There's something in my heart that the defenses dropped. And inside my head, I think I was saying, I don't know what this is, but I want what these people have. I'd never seen anything like that in a circle of hippies passing a joint around or sharing drugs. It was beautiful and it was genuine. And he got up that night and he preached this 15, 20-minute message. And it was like Cheryl had handed him a 3x5 card on, here's what you need to speak about tonight, Rick, because this guy named Bill is here. And here's his wicked life story. And he hit every one of those bullet points. And when he said, is there anybody here that's just sick of life the way that it is and you're ready to give Jesus what's left of your life? Something like that. My hand shot up. And man, I felt like I had touched a wire or something, in a sense. You know what I mean? There was just a rush of emotion. And like something was changing in me. And he said, if you're serious about it, and there were more than me, but he said, if you're serious about it, stand up right now. Wherever you're seated, stand right up. And I stood up, from this cross-legged position on the floor, and it just felt like God had hit the flush lever on the toilet of my life. And he just flushed out all the junk. And I, without anybody telling me what had just happened, I felt new. I felt brand new. And I knew that something had changed. This wasn't like anything I had ever experienced before. And I was fresh and clean. Then they told me, hey, Bill, you've been born again. Hey, Bill, you're saved. And they gave me a few other religious words I didn't know anything about, but I went home that night and I said, hey, Mom, I just gave my life to Jesus tonight. And they tell me I'm saved, that I'm born again. And I don't know what that means, but I know I'm different. I know I'm new. And she said to me, well, Billy, I don't care what you do. She said, just don't get baptized again. You guys, as a Catholic, you're baptized as a baby, and that seals the deal. And she said, just don't get baptized again. And 3 years later, I got to baptize her when she gave her life to Jesus Christ. Came to know him. And, this is not what I planned on sharing with you, but I'll get to that in a second. But you got to hear this incredible part of the story. I didn't know anything about this for 30 years, or at least 30 years. All through those years, I wanted to somehow find the courage to call Lou, my mom's old boyfriend. And I don't know why. I don't know what I would have said to him if I got him on the phone. But I basically wanted to ask him something like, Lou, what happened between you and my mom? And how did you, as a Baptist scout leader, set your eyes on my mom, and how did all of that happen? I finally got the courage one day. I was down in San Juan Capistrano with some friends from Australia. We had lived there and ministered there for several years. And they were visiting us, and we were in an old secondhand shop, and I'm flipping through a whole bunch of postcards, and old postcards, and I came across a postcard of Yosemite Falls. Now, in that trip up to Yosemite and Sequoia, when Paul and Steve and I hitchhiked up there, and we hitchhiked into the Yosemite Valley that one night, and it had to be July or August of 1970. And the next morning, we got up and I said, hey guys, let's hike to the top of the falls. And they said, no, man, we don't want to. You go ahead. So I hiked up there myself. And when I got to the top, almost to the top of the falls, if you've ever hiked up there, you might remember, if it's still there, there's a place where the trail sort of parts. You're almost to the top, to the crest of it, right where the falls comes over. And you can either go straight up or you can turn right, and you're on a little bit of a ledge that goes right on the face of the cliff. And it takes you up just a little bit of a different way, but you're standing there with a guardrail between you and about a 1,450-foot drop, just sheer drop down. And I remember standing there with my hands on that railing. And I had to grip that railing because it felt like there were hands on my back just pushing, saying, just get it over with. Why not die? Why not just get over the pain and be done with it? And literally for a moment, I never really had suicidal thoughts, except sometimes, when we were hitchhiking, we'd be in the back of a pickup truck, flying down Interstate 10 or wherever we were, and this idea, what would it be like just to jump out? I wonder how long it would take you to die, just getting hit by these cars and tumbling. And I wasn't like that. And I know it was just a suggestion of the devil, just trying to finish the destruction of one imploded, wasted life. And I stood there on that ledge, feeling like maybe get it. And I looked out at that valley. It was so beautiful. I thought, what a beautiful place to die anyway. And I to this day, it had to be just the grace of God that pushed me back. But I finally got the courage when I looked at that postcard. I'm going to find Lou Lyons. I'm going to give him a call. And his number was public information. It was still, dial 411 and is Lou, can you give me Lou Lyons, Cincinnati, Ohio? And a woman answered the phone. And I said, is Lou Lyons there? Is this the Lyons residence? Yes. I said, is Lou there? She said, no. Who is this? And I said, well, would you be Wilma? And she said, yes. Who is this? And I said, well, you'd remember me as Billy, but my name is Bill Welsh. And there was this moment of silence. We knew the whole family. I knew Lou and Wilma, their son Steve, their son Paul. We were all buddies in the scout deal. And I said, I'm Bill Welsh. You'd remember me as Billy Welsh. And there was this moment of silence. And then she said, oh, I remember you. And she said, I remember your whole family. That old boy. I've just turned over a rock with all kind of snakes underneath it. And we talked for a long time, and in the course of 2 conversations with her, because I want to put these together for you and end this really quickly here. I was talking to her about the fact that, hey, Wilma, I'm a Christian now. And she said, well, you know my Lou, he came back to me. I said, yeah, I heard about that. I heard you. I said, how did that happen? And she said, well, I just got my girlfriends from the church together, and we just prayed. We just asked Jesus to bring him back, and he brought him back. And I said, Wilma, that's awesome. And then I told her, hey, Wilma, guess what? I'm a pastor. I pastor a church out here in California. She said, that's wonderful, Billy. I love it when people still call me Billy. But she said, that's wonderful, Billy. The next conversation I had with her, because this question came to mind after I hung up the phone. And I called her back, and I said, Wilma, I have one more question for you. And then she told me again, and this was like a week later. She said, oh, Billy, you know my Lou, he came back to me. I said, yeah, I heard he came back to you. And I think she had a little bit of dementia going. But I asked her this question. I said, Wilma, when you were praying for Lou to come back to you, did you ever pray for us kids? She said, Billy, I prayed for you kids all the time. And I told her, Wilma, I know now why I didn't jump off of a cliff in Yosemite Valley. I said, you prayed me back from the edge. You prayed me back from the edge in a moment in my life where all I wanted to do was die. And it was you. And I told her this. I said, Wilma, imagine this. The woman whose husband is running around with another woman is praying for the kids of that other woman. I said, that's remarkable. Her answer, I'll never forget it, that quickly. She said, oh, Billy, I prayed for the other woman too. I said, Wilma, guess what? You prayed my mama into heaven. My mama came to Jesus 3 years after I did. And I believe it had so much to do with you loving your enemy. Thank you for loving my mom, and thank you for loving us enough to pray us into the kingdom of God when you had every right in the world, but not in the kingdom. You had every right in the world to be angry. You had every right in the world to be bitter, but you chose to be something better than bitter. You chose to be gracious. You chose to do exactly what Jesus said. What did he say in Matthew chapter 5? He said, I know that you hear them say to you, you can love your neighbor but hate your enemy. Which, where in the world do you find that? You don't find it anywhere except where Jesus said, I know people are teaching you this. It was a rabbinical idea. But he said, I'm going to tell you something else. I want you to love your enemy. Then he told us how to love enemies. He said, you bless them when they curse you. You do good to them when they hate you. You pray for them when they spitefully use you and persecute you. And then he says this, and so shall you be the sons of your Father in heaven. In other words, that's not what makes you a Christian, but that demonstrates that Abba is your Father. Because you start to act like and look like and speak like and pray like and serve like him. And I can't wait for the opportunity. If it happens this side of heaven, I will weep like a baby. But to put my arms around that woman, Wilma, and just thank her in person for loving me enough and praying me through the confusion. She had no idea. I wouldn't doubt if God's got all of this on a journal somewhere, on that July or that August day at 10:15 in the morning, here's this kid thinking about just lifting that leg up over the railing and diving into the valley below. God nudged Wilma Lyons, said, pray for those kids. What do you do when the Holy Spirit says to you, there's somebody you need to pray for now? And it's just that their name comes up. Maybe their face pops up. Maybe you flip through a yearbook. And, and in months and years from now, as you look through the pictures that fill up your phone right now of all these faces surrounding you, and you'll see that brother, you'll see that sister. What will you do when something hits you like, oh, I got to pray for them right now? You know what you just might do? You on the edge people, disciples, you might just pray them back from the edge. You might just bring them back from a decision that would be the most devastating thing they would ever make. That's ministry. I believe with all my heart, most of what we look at as ministry, the big style ministry that needs a business card and needs an office and needs a staff, all of that's important. But I believe that the greatest ministry and the most significant ministry you'll do will be the next thing that God calls you to do. The next thing that's right there in the middle of your road. I was going to go one direction. I want to go a different direction. Is that okay? You don't know the direction I was going to go, so I didn't even have to tell you that. But if you would look over at Luke chapter 10. Have you been in Luke 10? This is your last week, right? Oh, okay. But here's the great thing. At the end of this week, it's deployment. It's commencement, right? How many of you thought commencement was the end of something? Commencement's the beginning of something. A commencement exercise is where it begins. Let's commence. Let's go for it. A commencement exercise means you've been trained and now you're trusted to go for it. And so, I'm going to say it again. At the end of your 4 weeks, I can't wait to see what God does. As he spreads about 100 and how many of you? 150 of you? Out in all these different directions to touch a world in his name. Touch individuals in his name. Jesus is in Luke chapter 10, verse 25. Jesus was the busiest guy any of us have ever known. But he wasn't so busy, he was frazzled. He wasn't so busy that he was all anxious because he just kept doing, I think, the next thing that was put before him. I remember once walking into Pastor Chuck's office. And all of you know who Pastor Chuck is, right? I walked into Pastor Chuck's office, had a conversation I needed to have with him about the fact that we were changing the name of our church. We weren't changing our affiliation, just changing the name from Calvary Chapel, Huntington Beach to Refuge, Huntington Beach. And I wanted to talk that over with him. And I walked in and I looked at the corner of his desk. And on the corner of his desk, there was a stack of paper. If this is the desk, the paper had to be stacked that high on his desk. And I have to tell you, that comforted me so much to see he had a stack of paper higher than my stack of paper. And I looked at that and I said something, I probably shouldn't have said it this way, but I said, Chuck, this comforts me to see that your desk looks somewhat like mine with all these stacks of paper. And I started to ask him a question that was like, I think in my head I phrased it like, Chuck, how do you get through all of this? But I didn't even get halfway through. He understood the question. I said, Chuck, how do you get all? And he said, I don't. He said, I don't even worry about it. He told me, I just do the next thing in front of me to do. I do the next thing that God leads me to do. So here in Luke chapter 10, look at verse 25. It says, and behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him. A lot of people were testing Jesus in those days to try to trip him up and corner him. Behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Another way of saying that question, how do I get saved? What do I have to do to be right with God? What do I have to do here to make sure I go to heaven when I'm done here? And Jesus said, well, what's written in the law? What's your reading of it? You see what Jesus did there? There's another time when somebody came to him with the same question, and Jesus answered the question. He said, well, I'll tell you what you need to do. And he talks to him about the law, keep the law. The guy said, which ones? And so they walked through this whole discussion. This guy's a teacher of the law, and Jesus says to him, well, what any good teacher would say. Jesus says, well, hey, that's your specialty. You know the law. What's your reading of the law? Like a good teacher, you come to him with a question, what's the answer? Well, what do you think the answer is? Let me see how much help you really need. And so Jesus says, well, what's your reading of the law? Here's what he says, verse 27. He answered and said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to him, you've answered rightly. Why don't you go do that? Right answer, do this and you shall live. In other words, if you can keep the law perfectly, Jesus would say that all the law, all the prophets come right down to two things, right? What are they? Love God, love people. Which people? Well, the people around you right now. You can say you love people in Africa, and you can say you love people in South America. You can say you love people in South Central, but unless you demonstrate your love to them in some tangible way, it's just emotion. And it starts with emotion. That's not bad. That might be a direction that gets you headed that way to a different place of ministry. But Jesus just said, okay, you know what to do. Why don't you go do that? Why don't you start loving people? Why don't you really love God with all of your heart? Now, if all of the law and all the prophets comes down to those two things, love God with everything you have and love the people in your life. How many of you can go a whole day without violating one of those laws? I can't do it. Even when it's melted down to that, even when it's sort of stirred down to these two categories, love God with everything and love people, I still fail miserably. Yeah, how many laws do the Jews have? Is it 600 and something? 613 laws or 513 laws, something like that. A lot of laws, but it all comes down to, Jesus said, the way you treat people and the way you love God. And John, when he writes his little letter, he said, it's obvious if you don't love people, you don't love God. You can't tell me you love God if you don't love the people that he puts in your life. Not profound, very, very simple. And so he asked a question back to Jesus. And in verse 29, it's extremely important. Look what the man says back to Jesus. He, wanting to justify himself, which is what lawyers like to do, wanting to justify himself, he said to Jesus, who's my neighbor? I mean, come on, really, who's my neighbor? You know, the lawyers of the law. The law here isn't like the traffic laws, and it's not like, you know, it's the law of God. And they had argued about everything in the law. They'd argued about how to keep the Sabbath. You guys know those arguments on keeping the Sabbath? Here's one of my favorite laws that they had sort of tweaked into a place where they could keep it. On the Sabbath day, you can only walk so far. So let's say, and we're going to shrink it down because it was about 3/4 of a mile. But let's say I could walk from here over to that chair, and I could go no further than the corner chair on the Sabbath day. And that's all the further I could go. I couldn't go there and come back. So I had to measure my journeys to make sure I didn't walk any further than a 3/4 of a mile on the Sabbath day. But if this belongs to me, is this yours? Yours. If this belongs to me, and it's let's I'm not sure. Well, they didn't have cell phones. So let's say it's a coffee cup, a mug, and this is mine. This is a part of my possession, my household possessions. So if I walk out about almost all the way to that chair, and I'll stop just a little bit short, and I'll put my coffee cup down here. Now I'm not even out of my house yet. By their take and their twisting of the law, now I can go 3/4 of a mile further and take another coffee cup with me and put it out there, and I can just keep walking all day long. I could run a marathon or walk a marathon if I just keep taking household items and putting them out there. When God just said, on the Sabbath, stop. Just stop. Drop your hammer. Drop your rake. And everybody rests. I think it's interesting when God told them, on the Sabbath, I just want you to stop working. It wasn't even a go to synagogue day originally. It would just stop working. Trust me to keep your crops growing and the crows away from the corn. You just trust me with your livelihood, and I'll be faithful. That's it. That's all that it was. Just stop and trust me. You know what? If you compare Exodus and Deuteronomy, where the 10 Commandments are written, you do this later. And you'll find when it comes to the Sabbath law, God had said, you rest, your wife rest, your servants rest, your children's rest, and I think it was your oxen and your sheep, whatever the animals were, they rest as well. When it comes to the Deuteronomy version of the law, which is a rereading of it, it had to be amended. Because evidently, God had not said donkey. Your donkey gets to rest. So they went, well, wait a minute. He didn't say the donkey has to rest. So if the cattle rest and the oxen rest, we can still hook up the donkey, to a mill, and he can grind out grain on the Sabbath. And it was that meticulous. God had to say, no, everybody stops. So here's this man that knew all the law, and he has this question. Jesus says, yeah, won't you love God and love your neighbor? And he says, yeah, but really, who's my neighbor? And I think it's significant. He said he did it to justify himself. There's a backstory there. We don't know it. But he had done something that would definitely have been identified as not being loving to someone he should have loved. Who really is my neighbor? And Jesus tells him the story, the famous story. Let me just read through it. Then Jesus answered him. Story time with Jesus. A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, and they stripped him of his clothing, so now he's naked. They wounded him, they beat him up, so he's bloody and bruised. And they departed, leaving him half dead. I like that. Half dead, mostly dead. Not all dead, but mostly dead. Left him there by the side of the road. Now, by chance, a certain priest, there's a religious professional. He came, that's like me. I'm a religious professional. I'm a professional Christian. I make my living serving Jesus. This guy comes along, and he's coming down the road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. You've got to picture this. Don't picture Murrieta Hot Springs Road out here. and passing by on the other side of that big, wide, almost what we would call a highway. The roads that went from Jericho to Jerusalem in most parts weren't much wider than this right here, this middle aisle. And he is stripped naked, beat up and bloody, left for dead and robbed, laying in the middle of that road. And the priest comes along, and you know the story, the next guy, he comes along too, the Levite comes along, and he passed by on the other side of the road. Now, if he's stretched out in the middle of the road, you've got to find a way to get away from him or to keep away from him. Why? Why would this religious professional need to keep away from the guy? What's that? He's unclean. If his blood touches my cleanliness, then I'm unclean, and maybe I'm on the way to the temple. Maybe I'm on the way to do something holy for God. And so if you step over him and he kind of flails, as he's laying there and he touches you, oh man, now you're unclean. And if how many of you have ever been to Israel? Anybody here been to Israel yet? Some of you will be there one day. You got to go and see Israel. But on the Jericho road, as it winds its way through the valley and the canyons, there's places, and especially where the robbers would have been hiding, where they wouldn't be seen as some unsuspecting traveler comes up. There's canyons that go straight down into the valley below. And to get away from this guy, I've either got to sort of climb up on this really, loose gravel and dirt on one side or the other and risk my life to keep away from that guy touching me. The priest did it, the Levi did it, and then along comes the hero of the story. What was he? A Samaritan. Oh, Jesus does it again. He turns a Samaritan into a hero. I love that Jesus does stuff like that. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. I love that word, compassion. Compassion. He had compassion on him. So he went to him, and he bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, which would have had a sort of a medicinal effect on his wounds. And he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him that day. And on the next day, verse 35, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said to him, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. Wow. He didn't preach one story. He didn't preach one verse of scripture to him. He didn't slip a tract in between the windings of the bandages. He didn't even pray over him. He just loved him. He bound up his wounds with whatever he had. Put this beat up, half-dead man on his own animal and takes him to an inn, pays for his care, gives more money, says, I'll come back, and whatever it costs to make this man well, I'll pay it. An absolute stranger. And then Jesus asked the question to the lawyer. He said, so which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? Was it, let's have, every class has to have a quiz, right? Here's the quiz. You've got a Levite, you got a priest, you got a Samaritan. Which one was the neighbor to the guy that was all beat up? Just say it out loud. What was it? You know that he couldn't say it. The man, he sort of gave the right answer, but that's not what he said. He didn't say Samaritan. Look down at the verse. He just said the one who helped him. He said, he who showed him mercy. And then Jesus said to him, why don't you go do that? Why don't you go do that? I used to have, like I sort of suggested earlier, this idea that ministry, significant ministry, would happen for me when I pastored a church of a certain size, or when I pastored a church that had a certain kind of impact in our community, or that maybe when my name was recognized, oh, that's Bill Welsh. And it's still funny to me to hear somebody, this happened a couple of days ago, that I was walking into a yogurt store with my grandkids and my wife, and we go in to get something, for dessert, and one of the brothers from our church comes over with 2 guys that I hadn't met yet, and they were from another church in Orange County, and the guy said, you're Bill Welsh? It was almost exactly like that, you're Bill Welsh? And then the brother from our church told me afterwards, he said it was so funny when you left. One of them turned to him and said, "That was like the Bill Welsh." Ridiculous. But I've done that with people too. People that I respected in ministry, that I'd heard on the radio, or I'd read their books, or I'd listened to them at a conference. I used to think that real ministry, maybe it came with notoriety. You became important when you became recognized. And this story, for me, has changed my idea about what ministry is, I hope, deep in my heart and for the rest of my life. And the most important thing I do is probably not what I do on Saturday night at 6 o'clock and Sunday morning at 9 and 11, and Wednesday night at 7, or Monday through Friday on the radio. Most important thing that I do, I think, is the people that I personally touch, the people that I personally love. Now, people might get something out of the endless words that I speak and that I preach, and I do. I talk too long. I know that I do, and it's like an addiction. I don't know why I do it, but sometimes I just can't stop. My favorite interruption in a sermon was about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer. And this brother came up to me after the service, and he said, "Pastor, I am so sorry." I said, "What?" He said, "You didn't hear my mom?" I said, "No, what did she do?" He said, "You didn't hear that?" And we were sitting right over here. I said, "Oh, I saw something going on over there, but I didn't hear what she said." I was about 20 minutes into a typical 45-minute to 50-minute message. And I guess she turned to her son, and she's starting to suffer from dementia, from Alzheimer's. She turned to her son, and she said really loud so everybody in that area could hear, "Can't somebody shut this guy up?" Loud for everyone to hear it. And he tried to calm her down. She said, "No, serious, we got to get out of here." And I love that interruption because I do talk too long. But the most significant thing, and I want to close with this, and then we'll open up for some Q&A if you want. I think the most significant things that any of us do are laying right in the middle of our road every day. And you know what we try to do sometimes? We'll go so far out of our way to avoid the man or the woman that's laying right there in the middle of the road, just to make sure we don't get dirty, make our way around them and go on and do something spiritual and something important. Run off to either get famous or run off to be noticed. And we miss that. And it was just a person that needed oil and wine poured into their wounds. They just needed someone to love them. Got a couple of pictures back from our Romania team that are now on the way home from ministering in Bucharest to a bunch of kids. They said it was the toughest kids camp they'd ever done. The kids were so unruly. And most of these kids, if not all of them, have been abandoned. And it's not that they're literally orphans in these orphanages. The parents don't want them because they can't feed them. Our first trip there, we met this young lady. We went in with Operation Christmas Child. How many of you ever filled up one of those boxes? Those boxes changed lives. Don't stop doing it. Do more this year. And I remember my wife, she'd take one box. I'm flinging boxes at all kinds of kids. And she said, "I'm just going to spend time with one kid." And she found this box, and she found this kid that she felt like the Lord directed her to. And she sat down on the floor by her and helped her as she opened up her box, item by item. And in that box was a great big, like, cat in the hat. And she was probably 10 or 11 years old. And she started making piles of things that came out of the box. And it was a good-sized box. And my wife, Joy, she said, what are you doing with these stacks? Well, she said, "This is for my brother. That's for my sister. And this one I'll keep." And immediately she was thinking about, and so Joy talked with her, and she found out also from the people that ran the orphanage that these parents who under Ceausescu, he was a former communist dictator, he was trying to raise the world's largest army. And so there was a no contraception policy, and there were massive families. Some of you might even might be Romanian in your heritage. But they were massive families. And so when communism fell apart, can you imagine parents facing the excruciating decision, which children do I keep? And which ones do I have to hand over to an orphanage and sign them away? And these kids that our team just ministered with, they were hard. They said really hard. But I've got this one picture of this young man in our church, Noah Short, and he's not very short, tall kid with a missionary heart. And he's walking back to the orphanage with the kids that they'd been with. And they said it was a hard week, but it ended so beautifully. These kids would not let go of the leaders. And here's Noah, about 6 or 6'1", and there's a little boy, and they got the same hat on, they got the same colored t-shirt on, maybe it was a camp shirt, and this little boy, they said, would not let go of his hand. He had just loved him in the name of Jesus. Isus te obeste, it means Jesus loves you. And something had been done there. That little boy was the man in the middle of his road who had been beat up and left stripped of all that really mattered, of dignity. And Noah just came along and loved him for a week. Just loved him. I saw a picture of my daughter, a little video of my daughter, Shannon, who has the most incredible voice. And she's standing in, sort of face to face with a young Romanian girl about 12 years old. And they're in a train station, and they start to sing Amazing Grace. And the little girl had a great voice. She sang the lead to it, or the melody, and Shannon jumped in with the harmony, and it was just off the hook. It was so beautiful. I'm going to keep that. I'm going to find some way to keep that and show that to our congregation. But all they did is they just loved the people in the middle of the road. Now they got to tell them about Jesus too. And your love and your mercy, the way you show mercy to the outcast, the way you show love and compassion to broken people around you, don't think for a moment that God doesn't notice that. Don't think that it doesn't bless his heart. As you're talking these weeks about perfecting what? Holiness in the fear of God. Holiness, listen, it blesses God. It pleases God to see us live clean lives. Amen? It blesses you. Because the life that you want to live, holiness is one word that really describes it. It's full of beauty. It's full of righteousness. It's full of all the good stuff. And holiness, it prepares you to impact the world. So as you say, God, I'm all about you, and I will serve you and follow you with all of my heart. Get ready for the man, the woman, the child, the spouse eventually. How many of you think you might get married someday? How many of you think you found the person here? No, don't answer that one. But you might have, who knows? But don't you dare, listen carefully, last thing I'll say. Don't you dare forget that spouse of yours who will every day be in the middle of your road. Love them. Speak kindly and gently and in a way that builds them up. Pray for them every day. Well, you're already in a family. You have siblings, you have parents. Love those parents that are in the middle of your road. They won't believe the change when you come back. And stop stepping over them or around them, but just stop for them and you say, hey, Mom, Dad, what can I do? How can I help you? How can I lighten your load? How can I pray for you? And you speak words of blessing to them. Make it real that way. Perfect holiness in the sight of God. Love the next person in the middle of your road. And the preacher said, amen. And there any questions that... Is there still time for questions? Yeah. Any questions? I looked at your Facebook page for On the Edge, and looking at all your faces there, and I didn't get through all of them, I know, but I was so excited to come out here with you guys and just to see firsthand, see you in person, and just kind of spend a little bit of time together. But if you don't have questions, I have questions for you. But who's got a question? Yeah.
How did you meet your wife?
She. Well, two cherubim flew her right down in front of me and dropped her. No, we were. I met her in the fall of 1971, a year after I got saved, and we were working in a Christian coffee shop together in Long Beach. It was a place called the House of Zacchaeus. And how many of you know Long Beach? Anybody know Long Beach? 4th and Almond. You know where 4th and Almond is? You know what's there today? It's a Holy Mole. It's a great little Mexican restaurant. But yeah, we met there, and we didn't call it dating, but we dated, I guess, for about a year and a half, and then got married. 4 children, 3 married. Yeah. She is I write all kinds of, I write a lot of songs, and most of them no one will ever hear, but I love writing songs for her. My favorite one is "You're the Best Thing God Has Ever Given Me." I love her. Oh, I wrote one the other, less than a year ago when she was gone. She was out doing a retreat somewhere. And it was weird because I thought she's going to be on the East Coast for a week, almost a week. Man, I can do anything I want. Not that she doesn't let me do stuff, but I mean, I can just go exercising. I can do whatever I want. The time is all mine. And I came home that first night and I thought, she's not here. Oh man, she's not here. It was weird. I didn't expect that. And so I wrote her this song that says, when you're gone, I'm not the same man. And when you're gone, baby, I'm a mess. You know the days are long and the nights are lonely, but only when you're gone. And then the second verse says, when you're gone, I feel like a little lost boy. I forgot the next line. Anyway, she likes that one. She likes that one a lot. Any other questions? Yeah. Well, I don't know that always the first. I think you'll know the verses when you get to know the person. And so I think, and I don't mean to sound trite or dismissive at all on this, but I think the best way to start is hi. It really is just hi, and how you doing? My wife, again, Joy, I've watched her do this for years, and now we all do it. But she'll just go up to wherever she's buying, caffeine, or wherever she's, just at a store. She'll always say to the person behind the register, and it almost seems like, especially if they're in a bad mood. You ever run into somebody that just like, they're not really impressed that you're bothering them to be at their counter, but she'll always look them in the eyes and say, "How's your day going?" And you can tell by the way she says it, she cares. Almost every time. Without trying to exaggerate, I'd say 85 to 90% of the time they'll look up and say, "Thank you for asking." And that starts a relationship. And who knows where it goes from there. I did this once at a Pete's Coffee, right across the street from our church. And there's this young lady who's worked in there for a long time, and she's always a little bit dour, She's just not a real happy personality. And I looked at her and I said, "Hey, Hannah, how you doing?" And she looked up at me, and then she looked away. I thought, well, it's kind of noisy in here. Maybe she didn't hear me. So she went to, take care of whatever. She came back and I said, "How are you doing, Hannah?" And she looked at me again. She said, "I ignored you the first time. I'm ignoring you now." And then she went, "Woo!" And so I just prayed for her. Not there over the counter, but I would have. But I might have even told her, "Well, I'll be praying for you today." And I came back in the next day and I said, "How you doing?" She said, "Better than yesterday." But that'll start a conversation that might go deeper. Who knows? But and I really do believe this. I think you could write a manual on it, I guess. If someone is in this, here's what you say to depressed people. Here's what you say to worldly people. Here's what you say to homosexuals. Here's what you say to angry people. I think you just start with a relationship. Jesus started with the woman at the well by saying what? "I need a drink. I'm thirsty. Here's a well. You got a bucket. Can you give me a drink of water?" So, and then fill yourself with the word. You'll know what you have to share. And I always say to somebody when I'm walking away, "Hey, God bless you." Well, what if they're living a sinful lifestyle? You asking God to bless their sinful lifestyle? No, I'm just asking God to bless them. And I might walk away and pray for them, on particulars, but I'll just say, I want God to bless you. And if I get the opportunity later, we'll take it deeper. Another question? Anybody here sensing a call to the mission field? Anybody sensing a call to a specific place, specific country? Yeah, where? Mexico and what? Romania. Great. Bună dimineața. That's about all I know. And Iisus te iubește. You need to know that one. Jesus loves you. And, oh man, God bless you is a long phrase in Romanian. It's Dumnezeu să te binecuvânteze. And I'm not sure I pronounced it right. But I'm collecting how to say grace and peace in all languages. And in Romania, it's har și pace. Try that. Har și pace. Har și pace. And where are you saying you're going to go? Mexico. Gracia y paz. My favorite grace and peace, though, it comes from a tribe in Papua New Guinea. It's Mari Mari Bel Belang Yapela I Stop Isi. Go ahead, try that. Okay, here it is. You got to get this. This is one of the best ones because of the explanation. Mari Mari Bel Belang Yapela I Stop Isi. Here's what it means. The family that we knew that ministered there said, you know, there's really no word in this dialect for grace, which was devastating. Can you imagine? There's not a way to talk about, or one word, a concept that conveys the idea of a gift you didn't earn. So, Mari Mari, they said that's as close as it comes. So the rest of it is peace. Bel Balong Yapela I Stop Isi. And that means this, translated, the dynamic translation is this. My stomach is at rest between me and you. Isn't that great? Isn't that what peace is? Relational peace means we're okay. My stomach is not in a knot when I see you coming towards me. So grace and peace. Anybody else? Where else are you going? Anybody else know where you're going to be going? Yeah. Russia. All right. Where else? Yeah. Here in California? A particular neighborhood? Watts. All right. You're going to be working with Jose? Is that your dad? I love your dad. He's a great guy. I was with him up. Did you go to the movie the other night, the release? Wow. Have they shown the neighborhood here?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's great. Is David your dad? No kidding. Great. He's a great brother. Wow, wow. How many, let me see the hands of the PKs in the room. Oh, no way. Really? Serious? Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. Are we done or any more questions? Any more questions? And I don't want to pray for you guys. Any more questions? No? Yeah. That's it. And you have how many more days? 5 more days. Man, I wish that I had had something like this. I was on a camp summer staff, or a camp staff during the summer of 1971, my first year in Christ. And it was just the hand of God that got me out of the city for that summer. And it was a place called Quaker Meadow up above Porterville, way up in the high Sierras. And it was just, it was powerful. It was transforming. But I wish I'd had the opportunity to do what you guys are doing here. And, just get everything you can out of it, build relationships, care for one another, walk in the holiness of God, and touch the world. One of my favorite artists, I guess you'd say, somebody's wearing the t-shirt Humble Beast. Propaganda. I love Propaganda. And what a genuine, great brother. If you haven't seen his piece on My Next Record, have you seen that? Watch that. I don't know if you guys are doing any media here, but go on YouTube and pull up Propaganda, My Next Record. It's about 2.5 minutes, and but at the end of it, all the way through, he's saying, my next record will not. And he says what it won't be and what it will be. But at the end of it, and I want you to hear this, I think it's really important to make sure that our focus on what we're doing in this world, it doesn't get misplaced. I hope that your generation changes our nation. I hope that your generation changes the world. If it does, it'll just be what they call sort of serendipitous. It will be this: as you're in the process of preaching the gospel and loving the people in the middle of your road, there may be a city, there might be a village or a town where there's enough change that it changes the culture. It changes the morals of that town. It's happened in times of revival where bars get closed down and brothels have to shut down because nobody's using those services anymore. And it changes the culture. But here's what I love about that, My Next Record. At the very end of it, he says, my next record, it may not change the world, but it will touch the world. And there's a huge difference. I'm certainly one of those kind of guys that loves the rallying cry, let's go change the world, let's change the culture. And I hope we do. But it's pretty clear that the world's going to be in a mess when Jesus comes for his church too. I'm not saying give up. I'm not saying don't try to change your campus, but just touch your campus in the name of Jesus. Touch your neighborhood in the name of Jesus. Don't back down. Don't be afraid. Let me pray for you.